Well, hi, welcome to part two on the Aeneid. Last video, I tried to give you just a basic kind of introduction to the book. What I'd like to do in this video is alert you to some of the major themes that come across in the Aeneid so that when you're reading it, you can be looking for some of those things. I do want you, I hope you've already looked at the essay question for the week. If you haven't done that, please do that already. I am not going to kind of hold your hand and basically tell you what you need to write for the essay, but I do hope that this video might help to start to point you in the right direction there. So there's really four themes that I want to address, or at least mention. The first theme that comes through, and this actually follows up on a point from the last video. The first theme is what makes the Romans different from the Greeks, and what makes them, at least in some ways, better than the Greeks. There's this interesting dynamic in the Aeneid where Virgil is obviously deeply influenced by Homer, deeply admiring of Homer, wants to model his whole epic on Homer in some ways, but on the other hand, he wants to really point out how the Romans are very different. They have their own character, they have their own cultural values, and they're superior to those of the Greeks. Again, this is an epic, so it's supposed to kind of encapsulate the values of an entire people, and certainly Virgil is doing that. So Aeneas, of course, is going to be the model Roman because in many ways he's the original Roman. So what you need to do as you read is see how he is sometimes contrasted with certain Greek characters who tend not to come off too well. And probably the best example of this is the character Sinon. Okay? Sinon is a Greek, and he is essentially the one to kind of fool the Trojans into bringing the horse, the Trojan horse, the famous Trojan horse, into the city of Troy. You might be interested to know, sorry, I've got to get a pillow for my old man back here. You might be interested to know that the word Sinon is very closely related to a Latin word sinus, S-I-N-U-S, which means the coils of a snake. So he is snake-like, Sinon. He's wily, he's crafty, he's deceitful. He can tell these very long, elaborate lies without missing a beat. In many ways, he is highly reminiscent of Odysseus himself, who had a special gift for the gab, and especially a gift for the lying gab. Of course, in the Odyssey, Odysseus is the hero. But in the Aeneid, Sinon, who is sort of representing all the Greeks, is a great villain. So this is a way to kind of telegraph the audience, let the readers know Aeneas is going to be a very different kind of hero than Odysseus. And part of that is that Aeneas is honest, straightforward, transparent. What you see is what you get, unlike the Greeks, who are maybe a little smarter in some ways than the Romans, but who are cunning and crafty and snake-like. And the famous expression, beware a Greek bearing gifts, is actually, that's basically a paraphrase of a line from the Aeneid that you will read. Notice what happens a little bit later in the story when Aeneas tries to disguise himself. and see how that turns out. And ask yourself, okay, what might Virgil be trying to say here about the Romans and how they're different from the Greeks? Um, the Greeks are also singled out for being kind of irreligious, blasphemous almost. They don't respect sacred objects and sacred sites. So Cassandra, Priam's daughter, is violently dragged out of Minerva's temple, so the Greeks don't even respect the fact that she's there in this temple. They drag her right out. You're going to read about a scene where Pyrrhus, who also goes by the name Neoptolemus, don't worry about the name right now, he's Achilles' son, and he's going to kill Priam, king of Troy, as Priam is embracing an altar, sort of claiming sanctuary. Greeks don't care. Greeks just kill him right then and there. As you read in West in the World last week, the Romans really did think of themselves as the most religiously devout of all peoples, and I think you'll see that coming through in the Aeneid. All right, so that's the first theme that I want to draw to your attention. The second is really important, and I think it's really fascinating the way that Virgil weaves this theme all throughout the book. The theme is the opposition of furor, F-U-R-O-R, which is a Latin word, the opposition of furor and fatum, F-A-T-U-M. Of course, you can probably guess what English words we get from these Latin words, fury and fate. Okay? This is part of the drama of the Aeneid. In the person of Aeneas himself, there is this inner conflict. His fury, and fury doesn't necessarily have to be anger. Fury can be any strong emotion, any emotion that threatens to overwhelm you and sort of get the better of your good judgment. This inner conflict between fury and fate, this special fate that is waiting for Aeneas. And very early on in the epic, we are given clues that this is going to be an important battle. In particular, there's several references to fury or furor very early in the work. So very early on, there's that prophecy of Jupiter that I mentioned in the last video, where Jupiter is basically prophesying Augustus, and he claims that Augustus will chain up godless furor. Okay, this is on page 9 of our edition. There's also this moment when Troy is being sacked and Aeneas is just kind of going out of his mind. He's just not in his right mind. And he's describing himself at this moment, and he says, "Rage, furor pitched my mind ahead. How beautiful to die in battle." He is so overcome by his furor that he wants to die. He wants to die in battle. But here's the drama. If in that situation he were to die in battle, that might have been kind of a cool way to go out. But that would mean that his fate would be totally unfulfilled. His fate, of course, is to found this great people, this great nation that would one day have the greatest empire the world had ever seen. So that's the drama. If Aeneas gives in to his furor, he will not fulfill his fatum. And soon after this moment, he has this encounter with his wife, and she's already dead, so it's kind of the shade of his wife, Creusa. And she makes it very clear to him that that he needs to move on with his life because he's got this special fate in store. She says, this is on page 46, Why do you rave and revel in this sorrow, sweet husband? So in this particular instance, his furor is grief. He's overcome with grief, and she says, "No, no, no. Don't let this happen to you. It was by the will of heaven this came about." Um, so this is all fated, my death, the fall of Troy, and it's all to make possible the rise of this new great nation. So as you're reading, you're looking for places where Aeneas is struggling with his own furor. There's that moment when Troy is burning that I was talking about, actually a couple of moments uh, when Troy is burning. Most obviously, he is going to be sort of at war with himself in a way when it comes to Book 4, which is the rise and fall of Dido and Aeneas's affair. Um, Note especially when you're reading about that how Dido is described after she's fallen in love with Aeneas. It's very disturbing the way she is described, because again the idea is that she has succumbed to a furor, the furor of love or lust or whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't do her any favors. And then, of course, you'll want to sort of compare the state, the condition of Dido versus Aeneas at the end of Book 4. One of them has been totally overcome by furor. The other has managed to keep a lid on that furor. So be looking for that. A third theme is one that I broached in the previous video. Um, how to embrace one's future, a new future, while also paying tribute and honoring the past. And as I said, this was such a live issue for Virgil because he was living in this time when the Republic, as it had functioned in the past, really ceased to exist. Augustus was instituting a new form of government. You might call it the Republic, but it really was something altogether different. How do you pay tribute to the Republic, but also say, okay, the future is with Augustus, and we're going to embrace that. And of course, this is the story of Aeneas. He has to leave his home behind. He has to leave his wife behind. Eventually, he leaves his father behind. How do you do all that and not just sort of sulk and grieve and be overcome by that? But on the other hand, how do you move ahead in life without sort of forgetting about your past, forgetting about your heritage, forgetting about your loved ones who've departed? Because that's no good either. You want to honor those things. So that's part of the struggle of Aeneas as well. And it's interesting. He really only feels like he has sort of permission to embrace a new life once he gets it from his family members who have gone on. I mentioned that Crusa makes this post-mortem appearance and says, "You have my blessing. You need to move on. You need to go to Italy. You need to marry somebody else. It's fine. You should do it. Don't worry about me," that sort of thing. Perhaps not terribly realistic, but there it is. So there's that. He settles down in Italy after he learns that it was the homeland of Dardanus, the founder of Troy. I believe I mentioned that also in the last lecture. So he's only able to embrace the future with the encouragement of these figures from his past. And I want you to think, at the end of Book 2, he's leaving Troy, and there's this kind of beautiful image that Virgil creates, an image of Aeneas carrying his father on his shoulders and walking hand in hand with his son. I want you to dwell on that image a little bit and think about what it's saying about these issues that I'm raising here. Um, One last thing about this point, book 6 is important here too, because in book 6, he goes to the underworld, he sees his father Anchises, and it's his father who's really selling this idea, you've got to press on, son, got to make it to Italy, look at this glorious future that's in store for you. You really have to stop being a Trojan and embrace being a Roman. And I read a critic who made a great point about book 6, where he goes into the underworld. Aeneas goes into hell, as we would say as Christians. He goes into hell as a Trojan, but he rises back up as a Roman. He's now ready, finally ready to embrace that future. But what empowers him to embrace the future? It's his father. So that way he's keeping the past and the future connected. He's not abandoning one for the other. He's in a way doing full justice to both. All right, finally, last theme, Rome itself. I mean, this is an epic about Rome and about the glory of Rome. And certainly, on one hand, Virgil seems to be glorifying Rome and the Roman Empire. The very idea that it was this sort of predetermined fate that Rome would rule the world. And there's just several places where Virgil seems to suggest that the glory of Rome, the peace that Rome has offered the world, is worth all the bloodshed that made Rome possible. Again, think back to the prophecy about Augustus. Tight locks of iron will close war's grim gates. Augustus and Rome have offered peace to the world. And so it seems as if what Virgil is saying is, look, we may be neck deep in an ocean of blood that we have spilled, the blood of our enemies and Roman blood as well, but it was worth it in the end because now we can offer the whole world peace, of course on Roman terms, peace on Roman terms, but nevertheless, peace. So there is an element of what we might call propaganda here. I mean, again, he was commissioned by Augustus to write a great epic glorifying Rome, and so we expect to find this sort of thing here. But what I do want to point out is that there are moments of ambivalence, moments in which Virgil seems to be actually maybe a bit more conflicted about empire than it might superficially seem. And let me just mention in closing a couple of places where I think that ambivalence comes through a bit. I mentioned in the previous video the kind of abrupt way in which the epic concludes. Right? Aeneas plunges a sword through Turnus, who drops dead, and that's it. The end. There's something kind of unsettling about that closing and something about it that really sort of emphasizes the brutality of Aeneas and by extension the Roman people. So that's one place. I think you also have to consider Aeneas's relationship with Dido and the way that he treats her. And, Dido is portrayed, I think, very sympathetically by Virgil. I don't think we're supposed to hate Dido. I think we're supposed to feel pity for Dido. She's very much a kind of tragic figure. at one point, Virgil even says there was no fate or justice in her death. So there's a sense at which, okay, well, yeah, Aeneas, gets to go on to Italy and start this great new empire, but there's a great cost because Dido was a great woman and she was a great queen and she loved her people and they loved her, and Aeneas just kind of ruined all that for everybody. So there's another moment where it seems like Virgil's doing something more than just cheerleading for the Romans. And finally, the very end of our reading, at the end of book 6, there's this weird moment that scholars still argue about because they can't quite figure out what Virgil's up to here. But at the end of book 6, Virgil says that this is at the point at which Aeneas is in the underworld. He's about to leave the underworld. And Aeneas says there are two gates of sleep. So when you leave, when you kind of emerge out of a dream, there are two different gates through which you can pass. There's the gate of horn. Those are the gates through which true dreams pass, and there's the gates of ivory through which false dreams, delusions pass. Now, at this moment, Virgil has just seen this kind of sneak preview of the glory of Rome, courtesy of his father Anchises. So he sees this wonderful Roman future that will only happen if he gets his act together and goes to Italy and, marries a princess and all that stuff. So he has this great vision, and then he leaves through the gate of ivory, which is the gate of false dreams. Now, again, scholars are not sure what Virgil is up to here, but I can't help but wonder if perhaps Virgil is suggesting that, it's a nice idea, this idea that all the pain and bloodshed and war that the Romans have inflicted on the world is worth it in the end because the Romans, create this great empire and secure peace and so on. But is that perhaps kind of a wishful thinking, kind of a delusion, the idea that it's all worth it in the end? I don't know. It's just a thought. I do think that Virgil is more than just a propagandist. He's more complicated than just a yes man for Augustus. So be looking for places where Virgil is suggesting that maybe there's a kind of dark side to this Roman story. So that's another theme to be on the lookout for. Okay, I'm done, so I will leave it at that.